Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm doing a hypothetical 2028 presidential election, and just recently, about an hour and a half ago, I did a video about the Maryland governor Wes Moore, who has consistently ruled out that he is not running for president in 2028, though the article does mention he is laying a lot of the traditional groundwork and going to the early presidential states that usually does come with running for president in 2028. I personally think Wes Moore is not going to run, but for the purpose of today's video, I'm still going to do a hypothetical election for 2028 of what I think Wes Moore versus JD Vance could end up looking like. And before I get into the prediction itself, I do want to show you just some quick numbers. Currently, President Trump has an approval rating right now of 45.2% in the RCP average to 51.7% disapprove, an overall spread of negative 6.5%. It is worth noting that in the last few weeks or so, there's been some polls that showed Trump underwater by double digits. We've also had 3 polls come out showing Trump with a positive approval rating. Emerson had Trump tied in the approval rating. So all things just to watch on that. As for J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States and most likely a Republican candidate in 2028, right now his approval rating on RCP is 41.4% to 46.9% unfavorable. Overall, a margin of 5.5% negative. It is worth noting there's a lot more undecided opinions on J.D. Vance than Donald Trump. Rightfully so. A lot of more Americans don't know who Vance is compared to Trump, and Vance seems to have more wiggle room in terms of people knowing who he is. Again, his favorable is at 41.4, Trump's at 45, but Vance is very similarly underwater, pretty much by the same margin that Trump is as well. As for Wes Moore, I couldn't find any approval polls on him except for Morning Consult, which shows his net approval rating for governor of Maryland right now. But I think this is also good. He currently has a 32-point approval rating in the state of Maryland. So Wes Moore is one of the most approved of governors in the United States at this time, which is certainly good for him and his chances for 2028 if he were to run. It also showed President Trump's approval rating in a lot of key states, as well as some very important swing states like Wisconsin, where he's down 1, Michigan, where he's up 1, Pennsylvania, where he's up 3, North Carolina up 9, Georgia up 8, Arizona 6, and Nevada 8. But with all that said, let's get into the presidential election prediction for 2028. There are some states starting out that, based off the last few presidential elections, 2024, 2020, we know are going to go by a 15% margin or more for each respective candidate. Wes Moore, I fully expect to win the states of Washington, Oregon, California, and the state of Hawaii. I fully expect these to all be 15% margin of victory or more for Wes Moore. Illinois did get under 15 points in 2024, but I think it will revert back in 2028 with Moore at the top of the ticket versus J.D. Vance. I think Moore would get the state of Illinois. Washington, D.C. expect to be 15 points or more, as well as Maryland, Moore's home state, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Delaware, Connecticut, Vermont, and Maine's 1st Congressional District. As for the state of New Jersey, New Jersey's really tricky because we just saw in 2024 vote for Kamala Harris by only 6 points. In 2020, voted for Joe Biden by about 16 points. There's undoubtedly been a trend to the Republican direction in the state of New Jersey. But for Moore versus Vance, I do think Moore will be able to do just well enough to get New Jersey back over that 15% threshold like Biden did in 2020, just by a little bit. New York, I also expect to be safe Democrat. This puts Moore up to about 181 electoral votes in the safe Democratic column. We also have a good number of states that, based on the last few elections, I believe J.D. Vance will win by 15% or more, starting with the state of Utah and its 6 electoral votes. I believe it'll go safe for Vance, as well as Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, Nebraska at large, and Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District are all going to be safe. Nebraska's 1st District and 2nd District were under 15% in 2024. The margins for the 1st District had Trump plus 13 in the surrounding Nebraska 1 area, so it's possible that Nebraska 1 does go back to being safe Republican. I'm going to put it as likely Republican for now, but it is possible that goes safe as well. Kansas, it did go back to President Trump more in 2024 than it was in 2020, so I'm going to put that as safe, as well as Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina. So based on the safe states for both Moore and Vance, it's definitely pretty fair to say the Democrats start out with more states over 15% of the vote margin of victory and electoral votes than the Republicans have, though J.D. Vance is going to have more likely Republican states then Wes Moore is going to have likely Democratic states. So first, I'll start out with the states that, for that argument, that I think will be likely Democrat in 2028. I think Wes Moore would win the state of Colorado by a likely Democratic margin. We did just see Colorado vote for Kamala Harris by about 11 points. I think with Moore versus Vance at the top of the ticket, around 12.5% is where I think Colorado goes right now. Neighboring New Mexico voted for Kamala Harris by about 6 points over Donald Trump in 2024. Joe Biden won it by about 11 points in 2020. As for Moore versus Vance, I think it's probably going to not trend too much. I think it's going to go about 7.5 points or so for Moore over Vance at this time. I also do think the state of Virginia and its 13 electoral votes, Donald Trump made it much more competitive in 2024 than it was in 2020. It was only a 5.8% win for Harris over Trump. In 2020, it was Biden by 10 points. I think Wes Moore versus J.D. Vance, Moore being the governor of Maryland, I think will do better than Kamala Harris did in the state of Virginia. Maybe not as well as Biden did, but I think an 8-point win or so is possible for Moore in the state of Virginia. This puts Moore up to 209. Vance is at 122. Now we have the likely states for J.D. Vance, starting with the state of Alaska. Alaska was kind of borderline between being safe or likely, but it actually has a very consistent record at going in the likely Republican column. It went likely Republican in 2024, 2020, 2016, 2012, and then you have to go back to 2008 with Sarah Palin, the last time it didn't. So I think Alaska starts out right now for J.D. Vance in that likely Republican column, probably again around that 13% threshold. The state of Iowa and its 6 electoral votes, Iowa has trended a lot to the Republican direction in recent years. I think it will remain likely Republican again after it voted for Trump by 13 points in 2024. J.D. Vance's home state, Ohio, 11% win for Donald Trump in 2024. I think there's actually a possibility that Vance may win Ohio by less than Trump did against Wes Moore in 2028 if this was the matchup, probably by about 10 points or so, maybe a little bit under, but I do think Vance will hold on and win the state of Ohio. This puts it up to 148 for J.D. Vance. Next, the state of Texas and its 40 electoral votes. I know Texas is always talking about being competitive, but it voted for Trump by 13.7% in 2024, up from 5.6% for Trump in 2020, which was much closer, but also likely Republican. So I think Texas starts out as likely Republican for J.D. Vance. The state of Florida and its 30 electoral votes, I also think would start out as likely Republican for J.D. Vance. It voted for Donald Trump by about 13 points, up from 2020 where it voted by only 3.4, so a massive shift in the Republican direction. I think Vance could at least win the state of Florida by probably around 11 points in 2028. This puts Vance up to 218. Wes Moore is at 209. Now we're starting to get into the areas that I think are right around the edge between being lean or likely, but I did miss one, actually. I did want to mention the state of Maine and its 2 electoral votes. I did miss that. Maine voted for Harris by about 7 points. In 2024, 2020 was a 9-point win for Biden versus Trump. I think Wes Moore will win the state of Maine in the likely Democratic category. Okay, now we're on to the states I think will be lean, meaning 5% or under. And while we're up in Maine, I actually think Maine's 2nd District would go for J.D. Vance in the lean category. It did just vote for Trump by 9 points in 2024. 2020 voted for Trump by 7.4%, but I think there'll be less Republican turnout in Maine without Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. But I do still think Vance will win it by a lean Republican margin. So Moore is at 211, Vance is at 219. Now, while we're in New England, we have the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire voted in a very close election, actually, for Kamala Harris by 2.8% versus Donald Trump. It was actually a surprise to me, wherein Biden won it by 7.5% in 2020. For Wes Moore versus J.D. Vance, I think Moore would be able to do a better job at getting Democratic voters, or getting voters back to the Democratic side in cities like Manchester and like Concord, and maybe even do better in Rockingham County, which is on the border of Massachusetts, than Kamala Harris did. So I think Wes Moore would be able to win the state of New Hampshire by more than 2.8%, but I think it's going to be about 4.5%, just a bit under that 5% threshold to be likely. So I think New Hampshire would start out as lean Democrat right now. As for the state of Minnesota and its 10 electoral votes, I would also put Minnesota into the lean Democratic category. We did just see Kamala Harris win the state here by 4.2% versus Donald Trump. 2020, it went by 7.1% for Biden over Trump. This one I think is right around the threshold between being likely and lean. Like, I think I have it going 4.9% for Wes Moore over J.D. Vance at this time. Very, very close, but I am going to put Minnesota narrowly into the lean Democratic category. While we're also over here, Nebraska's 2nd District, it trended towards the Democratic direction. In 2024, it voted for Kamala Harris by 4.7%. I'm also leaving it as lean Democrat. just in part because I think J.D. Vance would do a little bit better in Omaha than Trump did, but I still think it would trend on the Democratic side. This puts Moore at 226. J.D. Vance is at 219. Now we start going through the main battleground states of the Rust Belt 3, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And then we also have the states of North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, all of which are now going to be the main battleground states for 2028. Starting with the state of Nevada and its 6 electoral votes, we saw a big shift in Nevada. It voted for Donald Trump by 3.1% versus Kamala Harris, up from 2020 where it voted for Joe Biden by 2.4%. In 2016, it voted for Clinton by 2.4%, 2012 for Obama by 6.7%. Nevada's undoubtedly seen a shift in recent elections towards the Republican direction, and I do think J.D. Vance will hold Nevada once again in 2028. I think he's going to win it by less than Trump did, though. Trump won it by about 3 points, about a 3-point win in 2024. I think Vance wins it by about 1.5 in 2028. As for the state of Arizona, Arizona also saw a big shift towards Donald Trump. In 2024, it voted for Trump by 5.5%, up from 2020, where it voted for Biden by 0.31%. I think Arizona could become a very close toss-up state in the next 10 years or so, but I think there's a little bit of a Republican resurgence in Arizona, so much so that I think Arizona will go Republican for J.D. Vance versus Wes Moore yet again. But in this situation, I think it'll be a lean Republican under 5 points, probably around 3% is where I have the margin of victory right now. As for the state of Georgia, though, Georgia and its 16 electoral votes, Donald Trump did win the state by 2.2% in 2024 after Biden won it by 0.24% in 2020. This state's going to be very close because the surrounding Atlanta area and Fulton County and DeKalb County and Gwinnett County did continue to trend to the Democratic direction in 2024, even as the rest of the state trended to the Republican direction from 2020. Georgia, I think, is going to be an absolute nail-biter in 2028 between Vance versus Moore. I think 2028 might be the last election for a while where Georgia narrowly goes for the Republicans. It's possible Republicans hold it in the future, but I am going to give the state of Georgia to J.D. Vance by just under 1% of the vote. It's going to be very close. Wes Moore, I think, certainly could win it, but I am going to give it narrowly to J.D. Vance. The state of North Carolina, I think, is kind of in a similar situation to Georgia, but a little bit more Republican. It voted for Donald Trump by 3.2% in 2024, up from 1.3% that have voted for Joe Biden in 2020. North Carolina, again, swung a few points back to the Republican direction, though it is getting more Democratic in the Charlotte area and in the Raleigh area and the Greensboro area. But I do think J.D. Vance will hold on and win the state of North Carolina in 2028. The question is the margin of victory. Right now, I have it as about 1.5 to 2%, which would put it in lean Republican once again. This puts Vance right around the edge of winning the presidential election in 2028 at 268 electoral votes. However, Vance does need to win one of the three Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, and this is where I think Wes Moore would actually be very strong and a chance to win these states. Starting with the state of Wisconsin and its 10 electoral votes. It voted for Donald Trump by 0.86% versus Kamala Harris in 2024. It voted tilt Democrat for Biden in 2020 by 0.63%. 2016 voted for Trump by 0.76%. I think Wisconsin continues its trend of voting tilt at the presidential level in 2028. However, I think Wes Moore actually wins the state by under 1% of the vote in a very, very close election. We saw the recent Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. It seems Democratic turnout and enthusiasm, and that was very high. And I think that might carry over into 2028. As for the neighboring state of Michigan and its 15 electoral votes, Michigan is fascinating because it voted for Donald Trump by 1.4%, a lean Republican margin in 2024, after it voted by 2.8% for Joe Biden in 2020. That was the largest of the three margins of victory in the state of Michigan in 2020 of the three Rust Belt states. Michigan, for some reason, it does very well when Donald Trump is at the top of the ticket. When he's not at the top of the ticket, Republican turnout doesn't seem to be as high. So I'm actually going to give the state of Michigan to Wes Moore for that reason, where I think he wins it by over 1 point, but under 5 points, around 1.5 as well, because I think Trump not being at the top of the ticket instead of Vance, it's going to hurt Republican turnout a little bit, enough for Moore to make up the margins in the state of Michigan, which means Moore's at 251, Vance is at 268. I think the 2028 election in this matchup would come down to the state of Pennsylvania and its 19 electoral votes. Pennsylvania voted for Donald Trump by 1.7% in 2024. It voted for Joe Biden by 1.2% in 2020, after it voted for Trump by 0.72 in 2016. It's going to be one of the closest states again. In large part, Trump did very well in Pennsylvania in 2024. He flipped Erie County up here. He flipped Bucks County, he flipped Northampton County, he improved some margins in Berks County and flipped Monroe County as well, while keeping Lehigh and Lackawanna competitive and Chester a little bit less Democratic. The question will be, is J.D. Vance able to replicate this map the way Trump did? And I think with a little bit less voter turnout, I think it'd just narrowly be a little too much for Vance to be able to hold on. I think Wes Moore would win the state of Pennsylvania by under half a percentage point, narrowly giving Wes Moore the victory over J.D. Vance at 270 electoral votes to Vance's 268. That's all I have for you in today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to give the video a like, click subscribe, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts of who you think would win versus Wes Moore and J.D. Vance, if Wes Moore actually did decide to run, of course. Thank you so much for watching again. I hope to see you in the next video.